Playing Resident Evil 3 Remake for the first time really struck us. Not just the gameplay or the tight story, but the context of playing it during a viral pandemic. The opening sequence, using live action footage to establish the tone, was disarming. It doesn't show zombies or monsters, it shows people, rioting and destroying things. It shows panic. As a Resident Evil fan, we were excited to see this intro because it parallels Resident Evil 1's remake intro, which shows photographs and news reports to establish its starting premise. It's something that makes the scenario feel more real, more grounded. The real element in RE1 falls away in chunks when you get attacked by zombie dogs before you get control of your character. Jill, a highly trained police officer, almost doesn't survive the first 5 minutes from a not completely implausible threat. Dogs conditioned to attack humans on sight is within the realm of possibility after all. Routing is just a little added treat. The opening cinematic really sells the pants-shitting terror Jill and the rest of the STARS go through, as does the rest of the game's scares, sometimes leaving the STARS members off balance. In 3 Remake, the real element is disrupted by Nemesis's early arrival and juxtaposes Jill's reaction from the first biohazards she's faced, as she knows she has no time to squat in awe at the behemoth if she wants to live. She's seen this all before. The game's depiction of mental illness and trauma is the best the series has ever done, as returning protagonists seem to be unaffected by the horrors they previously faced in a new adventure, at least in past games. Chris in Resident Evil 6 is an exception, but that depiction is colored like a war movie and feels like it wouldn't be any different if you took out the monsters. It's a distinctly, you killed my comrades and now I must end you, type of trauma. You know, the macho, acceptable trauma that's okay because you hit people and disrespect women instead of cry. Oh yeah, and also drink heavily. In 3 Remake, this just isn't the case. The dream sequence was distressing and intense, as it depicts Jill's very substantiated fear of being infected. Considering outside of gameplay, it's easy as hell to contract the T-virus. It's basically rabies. Jill's apartment communicated her depression and dysfunction through its mess and abundance of alcohol and what's likely supposed to be psychiatric medication, not to mention that the documents around the house build up this feeling of dread, giving us a peek into her paranoia, as the conspiracies she's investigating are real and life-threatening. This could also be read to be in service of the horror trope of a survivor being medicated and not believed about the monster, which ironically reminded us of the fact that many problems in life might be seen as medicatable through the medical industry, but that it's normal to be anxious and depressed when the world is on fire. Although isolated in her home as she is, it's likely she's coming apart at the seams of her sanity, as the police chief already denied the whole mansion incident even happened, effectively gaslighting Jill and the surviving STARS members. Jill is not okay. She's pushing down that PTSD like a champ. The dread that built wasn't just the mental and emotional anguish, and it's not just the impending danger of monsters right outside her door, but of a city failing its people and allowing a corporate entity to decide who lives and who dies. Adding it all up, it felt very familiar to how we feel right now. As a leftist, to be honest, we loved the intro to Resident Evil 3 and how it seemed to lay out the world in a way that was consistent with what we've been seeing. And it spoke without being heavy-handed, I guess? When we play games and we feel validated in our worldview, it sometimes worries us. Because discourse about games with heavy political messaging are often filled with shoving politics down our throat arguments. When playing 3 Remake, we didn't get that feeling? Which is bittersweet because on one hand, I feel gaslit by the conversations that insist that doing things like having queer characters in a story or having overt political themes for no reason makes the story worse or breaks immersion. So we tend to like it when media we consume doesn't validate us too much. Just a little, as a treat. But on the other hand, when something doesn't seem to have restraint with its messaging and themes, we love and respect the shit out of it. We've also come to realize that the Resident Evil series in particular has a track record of anti-corporatism, so this messaging isn't anything new, just more blatant, and it doesn't rock the boat like it would in a new IP. So, what about class consciousness? Keep your pants dry, we're getting there. Resident Evil's main villain, Umbrella, its founders and business partners, are worse than any monster or virus they create. In the process of building their labs and doing unethical experimentation, they have devoured countless lives from both people they kidnap and from employees they no longer value. Umbrella even has a secret prison for people they need to keep quiet. Very cost effective, and they don't have to answer any stinking government regulations. It's a win-win. Now, we looked to see if a director or writer of a Resident Evil game said anything about anti-capitalism or even anti-corporatism, but no dice. Working for a huge company like Capcom, I don't think anyone on the team will outright have said anything radical. After all, not to say anyone on the team is radical. But that's just an aggressive reading, right? Right? After all, these themes don't rock the boat, since evil corporations are very common in sci-fi anyway. From Dead Space to RoboCop, it's not hard to find. We're so used to them as an audience that many folks would sooner write it off than acknowledge its real-world counterparts, or parallels. Than acknowledge any real-world parallels. If you think about it, the main games before Resident Evil 4 all kind of have this unifying thing about them showing how companies are fudging evil. And it's easy to say, not all companies, and of course Resident Evil isn't purposely anti-capitalist as far as we might ever know. But it's hard to deny that the influence the Umbrella has is what many companies have in real life, even if they don't dole out human rights offenses in such a visible way. Remember, we're seeing the evils of Umbrella from the perspective of a whistleblower, not an average citizen. The fallacy that you just need a good company in charge, see Blue Umbrella, is the same as saying, we just need a good ruling monarch. It shouldn't be up to chance that someone or someones with great power in society should use it well. Society should, in our opinion, have fail-safes against abuses of power. That's why we're an anarchist. No unjust hierarchies, please. In capitalism, morality is disincentivized because it doesn't help profit. And for that reason, the most profitable companies would have to be the most willing to put profits over all else. And any companies not willing to do so will be buried by competitors. That's why Umbrella is so powerful. And that's why it took them 5 games to dissolve? That's not even covering the spin-offs, or the fact that the Umbrella execs were never charged criminally for their wrongdoing. They're still rich, white, and untouchable. The fall of Umbrella, as stated by Resident Evil 4, comes at the very beginning.
Not taking any chances, the President of the United States ordered a contingency plan to sterilize Raccoon City. With the whole affair gone public, the United States government issued an indefinite suspension of business decree to Umbrella. Soon its stock prices crashed, and for all intents and purposes, Umbrella was finished.
And after a 6-year time skip at that. And the founders and higher-ups still got up to experiments later anyway. Rich people have a different set of rules? What else is new? Welcome to Fluffbyte Presents. Can you hear that? It's class consciousness calling. During a very contentious part of Resident Evil 3 Remake, you fight through a power station infested by giant bugs called the Drain Demos. Demos is Greek for dread, so they can easily be interpreted as Drain Dread, which makes more sense in their original incarnation as they end up in more than just the power station, and they are particularly present in cramped hallways as well as the final area, the water treatment plant. But, regardless, they are dreadful. They make you use your hard-earned herbs if they grab you even once, because they force-feed you their babies, which, after a little bit of time, will totally kill you, not unlike the creatures from Alien. Unless, of course, you use an herb immediately. These enemies only exist in this one part of the game, which is a shame considering they were crawling all over the original Resident Evil 3. 3Remake's mechanic of the Drain Dreads making you use green herbs was interesting and challenging, and put a fear in us that Nemesis never did. So it was definitely a missed opportunity. In the context of the story, you read a few notes and even find bodies of electrical workers who fell victim to the demos. They had a bad time. One note shows how the bugs were there for a while and that no one in power cared. The bugs were attacking workers, and they just had to deal with it. I'm led to believe one may have survived, but the final note you find is written by the person that survivor was looking for. Their friend did not survive. When reading it, it struck us for 2 reasons. It's reminiscent of the infamous Itchy Scratchy letter, a note written right before one succumbs to a horrible fate, and something the series tries to reiterate in nearly every game. Because all the electrical workers were made to continue working despite horrible conditions, it reminded us of the pressure essential workers are under right now, and how they're necessary for society to function, but are treated like garbage by the current system. There's an additional note left behind by a sewer worker detailing the disappearance of a coworker, how the police refused to look for that worker, and how the author himself was being stalked by the 100 Gammas in the sewer. The note is found next to a body though, presumably his, which leads me to believe that he was killed by a person, since the Gammas swallow prey whole. An Umbrella researcher was testing the 100 Gammas in the sewers, and was very in love with them, as if they were pets. Gamma's eating everyone was very convenient for both the researcher and the police, who just had to shrug and say, oh, missing person? They probably just skipped town. The police may not have been intentionally complicit in the cover-up on the ground level, but ultimately that doesn't matter because cops are bad and don't stop crime even in the better circumstance. The guy is dead and his family will never know why. Reading these notes was super validating in a pretty horrible way. Art imitates life after all. These people were only a small sample of all the folks who had to put their lives in danger, often with little to no protection because the system they're in, that so many of us are in. A meat grinder that only values those it can exploit and which uses and abuses most people till they're no longer useful for that purpose, ultimately leaving the unproductive and the used up to die. While Jill was stuck inside, Raccoon City burned and so many people were suffering and dying. And notes like the ones in the power station illustrated in horrible detail. Umbrella had done this, but capitalism had given them the means and the government didn't care. Umbrella paid the city's paycheck. Real life isn't much different. It's just that it's happening on a much bigger scale. The fact that the police chief answers directly to Umbrella reinforces that. Any police that were dead set on helping the city were doomed from the start. Police Chief Irons sabotaged the city's police. The ones held up in the police station in particular were set up to die. And in 3 Make, a note in Jill's apartment in the start shows how Irons denied the mansion incident even happened. Chief Irons also disbanded the STARS team after the incident, for good measure at stopping them from blowing the whistle. Or so he thought. We're very much in the camp of ACAP, and this kind of is a great example as to why. Even if you have good intentions, going against the police apparatus is impossible. You can't change it from the inside. The story kind of puts it all on Irons, but in a lot of situations, it wouldn't be just that he's in the Umbrella's pocket. The police aren't defending public safety. They would be there to stop rioting. You know, defending capital. Just like the rioting in the beginning of the game. I think it speaks volumes that there isn't the police last stand like in the OG Resident Evil 3. It makes the remake feel thematically different. The police in general don't get any sort of glory moment, and now that we think about it, all the gates in the city as you first make your way through, keeping zombies at bay is troubling. Almost like cops just put up fences in areas that they deem lost. After all, Jill's desperate escape is a watershed moment for the city, and happens when everything is already coming down. Like a band-aid falling off of a large stab wound. Also, we have to point out that the huge company sent an assassin to kill multiple people who threatened their continued financial prosperity, of whom happened to only know enough to incriminate them because they survived an experiment that they were tricked into participating in the first place. Umbrella is like a kick-the-dog machine. They even kidnapped and groomed kids to grow up to be future researchers, but we'll save that for another video. And in 2 Make, they even use an orphanage as a farm for test subjects.
I decided then and there, the ashes of Raccoon City would be Umbrella's ashes too.
I should have seen it coming. It didn't take long after the fall of the Umbrella Corporation for their bioweapons to end up in the hands of terrorists. A new era of bioterrorism descended upon vulnerable countries, shifting the balance of power throughout the region. People in the destabilized areas soon feared another incident like Raccoon City was inevitable. As panic spread, governments of the world turned to the Global Pharmaceutical Consortium, which formed the anti-terrorism unit BSAA.
As the scope of Resident Evil's games expanded to an international stage with military organizations and sovereign nations, it devolved into a sci-fi military thriller, partially because, well, the threat is well known and is handled by those who are used to bioweapons. But Raccoon City Center games have a different tone. There's a desperation present that many games in the series don't have moving forward. Throughout all the games, however, is a strong message of anti-corporatism. Resident Evil villains commonly lack empathy and are usually driven by money, power, and accolades. This makes the horror more sterilized. The monsters aren't evil. They're often victims themselves. They're a product, and a very lucrative one at that. And anyone lost in the pursuit of creating that product, or to protect assets, are worth it. Nikolai and Jill are ideologically opposed. Nikolai has really internalized the lessons of capitalism. The only thing that he cares about more than money is self-preservation. Money can even be seen as a tool of that preservation. He seems almost bitter that Jill wants to help people despite the horrors around her.
Don't look at me like that, alright? I'm not unaffected.
No,
No, wait, please!
What the fuck?
He was infected.
He might have been infected.
Oh, stars, this soft. No wonder so many of you dead.
And what are you, UBCS? Killing your own people?
He would have turned. There's your sense of self-preservation. Go back to the subway station. We don't need a bleeding heart like you getting in the way. Why is she here?
She's helping get the trains running again.
Had time to start getting dead weight for it. She's unreliable. Can't pull the trigger when it counts.
Hey, take it easy.
She'll get you killed.
Nikolai trusts no one and hates Jill for not being that way too. In fact, he seems upset that she even made it this far without being like him. Jill, on the other hand, despite the tragedy she's faced and losing most of her friends to violence, goes out of her way to help pretty much anyone she encounters. And although she doesn't trust the other UBCS members at first, outside of Nikolai, she seems to warm up to all of them. The extent of Jill's altruism even surprised us. While playing for the first time, we got mad at her for putting herself in danger to buy the UBCS and the people they're trying to save more time. This was because we were afraid of facing Nemesis again so soon. Were we playing as Jill, or working with her? The game is good at aligning the player with Jill's headspace. Jill steps it up even further by risking her own life trying to acquire the virus vaccine to save Raccoon City from its horrible fate. And she is visibly distraught when Nikolai seals that fate. Moreover, her trust of Carlos was what spurred her to go to Nest 2 in the first place to get the vaccine. Her affinity for Carlos is displayed in her second nightmare sequence, which shows her fear of having to put down Carlos in the event he gets infected. It's a very poignant moment, but you'd be forgiven for not realizing the depressing context. Jill's time in the Spencer mansion included putting down undead comrades, watching comrades die without being able to intervene, and being betrayed by her squad leader who essentially murdered their team and countless civilians for a product test. Umbrella and their virus is at the root of all the tragedy she's faced so far. But what helped her survive is trusting her comrades, which can't have been easy since Barry also betrays Jill in Resident Evil 1, but is later revealed to have been blackmailed under the threat of violence to his family. The only way to get the true ending in Resident Evil 1 Remake is for Jill to trust Barry, who at that point had already left her for dead once before. This is thematically relevant to her relationship with Carlos because he was an Umbrella employee when they met, but he saves her life before they even get to exchange words. She trusts him just enough to not shoot him, but eventually comes to see him as a comrade, so much so that while she's infected, her nightmare is about having to kill him, not her own impending infection. Throughout the game, Nikolai berates Jill about her worldview, saying that she's a bleeding heart and can't pull the trigger when it counts, which was kind of confusing at first considering Jill's definitely a fighter, but she only kills monsters, and Nikolai has no remorse about any of the humans he puts down. He's willing to put them down for survival or for profit.
Nikolai, don't! The city needs that vaccine!
More than I do. I don't think the wisdom I've been trying to impart on you is getting through. Now, I know you can't put a price on life. But I'm in this business to get paid. So, let's make a deal. You go down there, battle the Nemesis, and I'll recall it all and sell the combat data. Put on a good show, and maybe I don't need the vaccine. Agreed? Good.
At the end of the game, Jill's holding Chekhov's gun. All of her interactions with Nikolai have led up to this point. It's finally time for her to pull the trigger. And she does it. But not like Nikolai believes she should. In fact, the first time through the game, we were thinking more like Nikolai during the standoff. We tried to shoot him the first time, we tried to go for a fatal headshot. And in the most delicious irony, because his head is a smaller target, we missed. So, on the next attempt, we don't try to kill him, and in doing so not only beat the game, but it's shown that Nikolai was wrong. It's not better to only be out for oneself. Jill isn't soft for wanting to help people or valuing human life. This was a defining moment for us, because Nikolai didn't seem to budge on his anger towards Jill, even as she proved her survival skills time and time again. It was clear early on that his anger towards Jill was intrinsic to who she was. After the standoff, and with little power left to speak of, Nikolai tries to take advantage of Jill's altruism and attempts to bargain for his life. I don't think Jill leaving Nikolai to die is validating his worldview though. It was a huge risk she couldn't afford to take. If he saw a chance to turn the tables on her, he surely wouldn't hesitate. Jill says after escaping the city,
I felt empty and cold as the heat from the blast washed over us. All this death wasn't caused by a monster-making virus. It was greed. Human greed.
and she's right, but that greed was encouraged by a system that rewards it. And even if she only blames Umbrella, her devotion to taking down the evil corp after Raccoon City is a testament to the real work that must be done to remove the heel of capitalism from the neck of all those it dominates. Although, It is wishful thinking that a few ex-cops could overthrow one of the biggest corporations in the world excelling at pharmaceuticals and weapons technology. At the time of release of Resident Evil 4, the most fans were privy to about the fall of Umbrella was their stock crashing because of their suspension of business, which proposed that Umbrella could be stopped through capitalism. Resident Evil neoliberalism. Although in later installments, we see Umbrella is essentially still kicking.
Umbrella's stock plummeted with government inquiries into their involvement in the Raccoon City incident. Before long, they were able to redirect responsibility for the incident. Part of the blame was cleverly shifted to the American government. Umbrella had strong ties and deep pockets. Thus, they were able to drag out the legal proceedings. Over time, it appeared that all evidence of Umbrella's involvement had vanished with the missile touchdown. How convenient for them.
Because again, the CEOs got off scot-free, and they started the company with the intent to create superviruses. Actually, now that I think about it, all of the Umbrella CEOs and higher-ups have died. Usually by being murdered, not by being brought to justice. Sometimes by their own subordinates. To be honest, Resident Evil always backpedals to Umbrella when it's feeling insecure, which incidentally has armed us with a pretty nice take. See, the Resident Evil Umbrella Chronicles games, originally for the Wii, seek to expand the lore of Umbrella, so instead of a typical RE release, this reimagining of the events of the unapproachable, tank-controlled Resident Evil games, up to that point, through the lens of a rail shooter, ended up being a treasure trove of lore. Or just retconning, but whatever. And it indulgently took the route of telling Resident Evil vets an action movie with horror aesthetics was happening in the background of every mainline game. But one of the standalone adventures revealed Chris and Jill storming the last major Umbrella compound to finally purge the world of its evil, which incidentally falls in line with the unquestionably uncanon Resident Evil comic books that show Jill, Barry, and Chris fighting across Europe to take the fight to Umbrella vigilante style. Keeping those things in mind, it seems that Umbrella was actually taken down by radical anti-corporate action? And all because Umbrella decided to test a few BOWs on a SWAT team. Wild.
God, Jill knew all along. And she trusted me anyway. Fuck!
It would be amazing to see Ed's law enforcement radicalized to the left to the extent that they might seek to fight and die to stop a corporation from hurting people. But this only ended up going so far because, as far as Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6 are concerned, the real problem is
Terrorism.
bioterrorism. It is naively narrow to think that shutting down Umbrella would prevent outbreaks elsewhere, although, to be honest, that's kind of the status quo for the series. In recent years, installments have been kinda contained, but most of the Resident Evil stories across most of the mediums show a deliberate viral outbreak that is solved through violent action, and usually a rocket launcher, instead of addressing the root causes that make these things possible in the first place. Although considering what the remakes of Resident Evil games have done so far, we hope this trend of a more political Resident Evil, as opposed to one where you can solve capitalism with guns, is a trend that persists. Jill's slow trust of Carlos shows major inklings of class consciousness. She recognizes not everyone who works for Umbrella holds its values, which makes sense. Capitalism holds a gun to all our heads. But the UBCS candidates are coerced even more. Umbrella seems to commonly take its security candidates from those already marked by violence, as we see in the diaries of fallen UBCS members. One, a PTSD-ridden military vet, and the other, a life sentence inmate that got released to work for Umbrella. In this system, we are all at risk of being destitute without money, which drives a lot of our decisions. We don't get to find out Carlos or Tyrell's backgrounds over the course of the game, but Carlos initially seems genuinely wanting to save cities, and is slowly radicalized through the game simply by learning more information about Umbrella's dealings.
You heard what he said. We can't turn him over to the company. That's not our call to make. That's Mikhail's call. I'm gonna check the computer, see if I can trace the doc's location.
Although seeing as Carlos's wiki says he was in a communist militia from an early age, and that he was recruited into the UBCS after that militia was killed, and he had been slated for an execution, we think it's safe to say he's pretty rad. But also that his faith in Umbrella was likely based off of the fact that they saved his life, and told him that his unit's role in Raccoon City was to help civilians evacuate. He was likely all too eager to turn a blind eye to Umbrella's intentions. Even OG Resident Evil 3 misogynist Carlos was aware of his complicitness, but didn't think he had any power.
I need to ask you something. Why did Umbrella send your team here?
Our mission is to rescue the civilians.
How kind of you. Considering Umbrella caused all this in the first place, those liars!
Look, we're just mercenaries, hired hands. Do you really think the master would tell his dogs why they have to retrieve the stick he just threw?
We can honestly say Resident Evil 3 Remake didn't just strike us. It took the wind out of us. And in a world where so many seek for games to be seen as anything besides political, it reconfirmed that the failings of capitalism are apparent to folks not even as left as us. We recognize that all this may end up being a capitalist recuperation of playing a game in which you get to strike back at the companies that hurt and traumatize so many of us, but we never really felt confident talking about Resident Evil and politics before this game launched. Resident Evil is so much less camp than it used to be, and a surprising consequence of its dive into realism has been its increased relatability, with its characters and with its story. And although it is wish fulfillment, we are quite inspired. And with the world as it is looking so much like a Resident Evil game lately, it's very sorely needed. Don't stop fighting, everybody. Take care of yourselves. Hiya there, everybody. It's me, Infantabyte. Hope you're all doing well in these trying times. Thanks for watching this video. Sorry this month has been quite a tizzy. This is obviously a recut of one of our oldest essays, and it had bad audio, and even when we posted it, we were kind of embarrassed by it. Even more so when ThoughtsLine mentioned it when he platformed us. Yeah. Anyway, we'd like to say thank you to our wonderful patrons: Valued Customer, Sammy, Jamie J, and 12 Face Productions. If you'd like to join this awesome cohort of folks that support us and have your name at the end of our videos, as well as other perks depending on which tier you pick, then please support us on Patreon. But only if it won't hurt you. You cannot pour from an empty glass. Just something to remember, huh? Anyway, September kinda sucked. October should be better. We have something really awesome planned for Halloween, but in terms of videos, we'll see where it goes. We're still hopefully gonna release the Last of Us essay before the end of the year, and we are planning on definitely releasing the Deltarune essay. Aside from that, we'll keep a lid on anything else that we're planning for now, just so we don't get too big for our britches. Anyway, you can also watch us play stuff on Twitter, like we'll be doing tonight, or technically this morning at 1 a.m. CDT. Anyway, that's it for me. Have a good one.